Even though most of the ideas for your quick tips come from your comments, occasionally I will get an email. And this one is an email. This person says, I bought several of your lessons and I've studied composition. Lately, I'm hearing something I don't understand. In tutorials, people have said the composition should reach at least 3 sides of the painting, like in a portrait, connected to the sides of the paper in watercolor and so forth. What do I not know about this compositional technique? She goes on and says, I just don't get it. Well, I don't get that either. Let's dispel another myth. To begin with, your composition is not just your arrangement of shapes. I know that people with good intentions will often say, set your composition first. That's not your composition. That's your placement of shapes. So there's the first thing. Your composition involves everything you do in a painting. Everything you do contributes to that composition. So the final composition can't be set in the beginning. It only reveals itself at the end when the painting is finished. So that one I want you to think about for a while. Now the other thing is, when in painting, we already have a shape when we begin. When you start painting, you're going to have, if you're using a rectangular shape, you're going to have 4 sides, either vertical or horizontal. The first mark you put down then begins to compose the shapes. So if I put a shape, say right here like that, that's placing a shape. Now if you look through a lot of the more modernist paintings, the abstractions and so on, a lot of times you'll see a completed painting just like that, but you don't see the sides of this touching the edges here. But we can go back further, or we can go deeper into the realistic painters, the master painters, and we can see how they didn't connect 3 sides as well. Now, that's the myth. I know it's being taught. I know the intentions are good intentions. People are trying to guide you into considering the whole area in your composition. But that you have to have your subject touching all 3 edges, or at least 3 edges. Well, if you look back at your masters, you see that's not always true. So that's what I want to work with you on just for a moment or two in this quick tip. So let me remove this. Now, one of our masters, John Singer Sargent. This is called a fruit cellar, and I want you to look. It's only touching right here and a little bit right there. That's only 2 sides. We only feel the image touching the sides really strongly right here. But you can see the image is not touching the side up here, or it's the edge up here. We should say the edge instead of the sides. And it's not touching down here. So who would argue with Sargent? Now, if you look at it from another point of view, that Sargent is designing space, and with his images, he's designing space. You are too. With your images, you're designing space. You have 2 kinds of space that you're designing. When you place the image, such as Sargent has here, you begin to establish what we call positive space. That means space occupied by the image, and then the space around it is a negative space. Well, then if you look at these shapes around it, those shapes are a part of the composition. In that sense, that business of the touching the sides is true. That the negative shapes are touching the edges, but the negative shapes are touching the edges on all sides. So when you have doubts like things like this, it's always better to refer back to the masters rather than maybe stew about it. Now let's look at how some of the other masters have handled that same problem. So we'll pull Sargent's piece off. This is Andrew Wyeth. This may be one that you're familiar with. Now notice what Wyeth has done here. You see the image itself is only touching one side. The image is not touching here, it's not touching here, and it's not touching there. There's a little bit of the landscape that's touching right there. So, but you see, we do get that sense of designing space. The negative space is playing a very important part in the interpretation of the image here. The image is called Trodden Weeds, and the focus is on this person's walking through the weeds. And the way the shapes are developed around the negative shape and the foot pointing in this way, and the foot this way creating the negative shape here and here, creates this wonderful large negative area in which the smaller positive area fits. So we have this occupying that space, but only one part of the image going off the edge. So you see there are many ways to compose your images onto the picture so that you don't have to have them touching all three or three of the edges or three of the sizes, but you can compose your images in such a way that you create a strong negative space and still have a strong painting. So that's one way Wyeth handles that. Now let's get rid of Wyeth and let's look at our master Richard Schmid. Now I know you keep hearing these names. If you're watching lots of our quick tips, you keep hearing me refer to Sargent. You hear me referring to Andrew Wyeth and Richard Schmid. Of course, they're not the only masters, but they are masters that I know we can depend upon to handle the principles the way that can create the most masterful paintings. Notice what Schmid has done here. You don't have images, you don't have the image touching here. You have a little bit of this going off the edge here and a little bit going off the corner there. So he's sort of eased in to that concept, but not on purpose. The major part of the image is doing something else that we've heard, a myth that says never place the subject right in the center of the canvas. Well, never always has challenged me. When I hear someone say never do this, I always say, I wonder if there's not a way. The master painters know how to do these things and make them work because they know how to arrange images so that it carries the eye away from where they seem to have placed it. But anyway, let's look at the negative space he's created here. And even though this fills in the center, we see the strong horizontal of this rose turned in this direction that's pulling our eyes over here. And then we see a counter diagonal move in this direction. It's pulling our eyes here. And then we see the movement here is pulling our eyes in there. So we have the negative space he's created by doing that. And of course we see the negative space against the edges is enabling us then to see the import or the strength of that positive space here, here, and here. And so we can see already that that myth has been dispelled. The myth of images must touch three edges. So let's go into one more. Now prepare yourself for this one if you haven't already seen it. I've always found it one of the most beautiful. The next one I'm going to, I've always found it one of the most beautifully composed paintings and most horrifying scenes that are out there today. And that's Wyeth again, called the Kerners. But you can see what Wyeth has done here. We have the images themselves just anchored to the bottom here. This image is anchored to the bottom and the side. And this image is just anchored to the bottom. We have a bit of suggestion of the environment, the room itself, connected to the edges. But the major images that we see there are separated from each other and connected only, this one connected on 2 spots, this connected only on one spot. But we look at that strong negative space. Now see, if you learn to use the negative space as a shape, a strong shape, finding a way to design that strong shape, then you can consider that as a part of the whole composition, because it really, really is. And then you can find ways to make those images work by not having to contort them and cause them to go off on all 3 edges. So forget the 3 edges part. Consider the whole space, the whole shape, the whole surface. Consider that your first edge. That is the first set of edges. That is your format. That's the space that you're working in. When you're working the placement of your images, look carefully at how you're placing them so that the space, the shapes that you create between the images and around the images reinforce the images and create a relationship between the images, rather than just exist there as what people call background. It's one reason why I can't stand that word background. It doesn't say anything about the environment that a person is in. But whenever you're creating a painting of anything, you're also creating an environment. So look at what the environment's doing. Look at how the negative areas of that environment are interacting with the positive areas. Don't worry about whether it's going off edges. Just worry about just be concerned about what you see happening in the relationship between the images in the space and the space around the images. Be sure and view all of our quick tips. And while you're doing so, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell so you'll always get a notice when we produce a new quick tip, which is every week. And if you have a question, leave it in the comments section and we'll make a quick tip for you. Also, take a trip over to diannemize.com where I have full-length lessons, downloads, DVDs, lots of other stuff there, some free stuff for you. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll always be informed every time we do something new.